Guys, today we have a blowout of brand new Halo Infinite story details. The prelude novel Halo Shadows of Reach just released, and I got the book early, so I have already read the whole thing, took notes, and broke everything down. We have potential spoilers ahead, by the way, like Chief's new AI, humans working in the Banished, mention of Noble Team, the Oracle, new Banished characters, a portal under Reach's Highland Mountains, confirmed Silent Shadow characters, a tease at the Flood threat, and the Infinity fighting full on with the Banished in a massive war. Guys, today we have so many things that's just too much to tease here. Before we get ahead, remember there are massive spoilers for Shadows of Reach, as well as a lot of hints as what is to come in Halo Infinite. So guys, before we get into it, be sure to smash that like button so hard it turns blue. Let's go ahead and try to get 4,000 likes on this video. I have spent an ungodly amount of researching and diving into this book and would love the support, as every like really helps out the content. And be sure to subscribe. Alright, let's jump into it. This video is sponsored by Audible. Start your trial with Halo Shadows of Reach, the full audiobook for 30 days. Link down in the description. So Halo the Shadows of Reach is essentially a prelude. It's a warm-up to Halo Infinite. And there's a lot of information in this book that I've tried to reduce down to only the super interesting stuff, and still we have a massive video here. And before you say it's just a book, has nothing to do with Halo Infinite, keep in mind that this month 343 and the writer already confirmed that this book does tie in with Halo Infinite, that there are things in this book that if you read and understand are basically going to be rewarded in Halo Infinite. Alright, so this is essentially a big tease at Halo Infinite. And with that being said, let's take a recap of the Halo timeline, alright? So Cortana was supposed to reach Dr. Halsey to basically for, a rampancy cure and an old age for AI. And eventually Cortana's chip was incinerated in the Battle of the Didact, and it essentially used the last of her power to form Foreigner Hardlight shield around Master Chief to protect him from the nuke that he set off to essentially save Earth from being composed. Now, this happened on July 25th, 2557. Blue Team would regroup and go on tons of missions while Cortana was supposedly dead until October 2558, where the events of Halo 5 unfolded. Chief would be contacted by Cortana and the Guardians would begin to rise and basically all group up at Genesis. And when Blue Team actually got there, she pronounced her plans to enforce the mantle of responsibility, something that humanity was supposed to take upon, but the created have instead, and she effectively got all the AI in the galaxy to turn against their creators, against the humans, and she effectively started martial law across the galaxy. And this is something that would not go away immediately. It is still, by end in this book, still a problem. And it was right at this time, the big blackout of Cortana's takeover, that the Banished would arrive on the Ark. And then a few months later, March 2559, the Spirit of Fire would enter combat with the Banished, and essentially that was Halo Wars 2. They would fight over a replacement ring, Installation 09, and just a few months later after that, the Banished accidentally unleashed the Flood that until now was contained on High Charity when it originally crashed in Halo 3. Now, it was right before this that Atriox had sent Ashurim to search Reach to find a portal under a mountain so that the 20,000 or Banished forces and allies could regroup on the Ark. Meanwhile, the Infinity is evading Cortana throughout 2559, and essentially during this time they are picking up allies and UNSC personnel, key people, to help essentially stop Cortana and find a way to fight back. Effectively, the Infinity is playing cat and mouse with Cortana and the Guardians, and her massive network of surveillance around the galaxy is making that pretty difficult. And in this book, we learn that Cortana's intent is pretty clear, that it's very likely that if Cortana was to ever find the Infinity, she would not just shut it down and arrest the people in it, she wants to destroy it. Alright, so Shadows of Reach is basically a week long of events where Blue Team goes to Reach to grab assets at Castle Base. So the story starts exactly 1 year after Halo 5, and after all the stuff I just mentioned, alright? Blue Team is inserted on a top secret mission to retrieve the assets, Dr. Halsey's assets, some very specific things hidden in the partially destroyed Castle Base. And I do believe that this book, I will mention it when it comes up, has direct ties with Halo Infinite's gameplay and cutscenes, and will be shown as such. In short, I think the end of this book is going to be the first mission of Halo Infinite. So it's very relevant to gameplay. And if you look at this snippet from Halo Infinite's trailer Step Inside that was revealed back in July, Chief's armor here was last modified just 2 weeks before the insertion operation takes place, which we're about to break down. But what I'm saying is, right here is probably a glimpse as to what we're seeing in this book, Shadows of Reach, that Master Chief is on Reach, and that very likely the first mission will take place of Chief's deployment on Reach in a massive battle that we even see in a cinematic, which I believe is what we saw at the Xbox Series X announcement a few months back. But I'll talk about that later. But we start the story on the morning of October 7th, 2559. Again, this is about 1 full year after Halo 5 ended. So the novel opens up with Blue Team being inserted on Reach in a vehicle called an Owl, with a few non-Spartan characters as well, including a younger soldier named Shapov, also Van Hoot, and Mukai. Now, Mukai is kind of standing out as like the kind of cliche, sassy, kind of bossy female pilot, very head honcho about her aircraft. And also another thing that we'll hear about a lot in this story is the excavation equipment. This is absolutely necessary to the mission because Castle Base was technically blown up in Halo First Strike, or technically at the very end of Halo Reach, although was not seen in the cutscenes. Essentially, June escorted Dr. Halsey to Castle Base, and she committed White Glove, which effectively wiped all the systems and blew up the base. But anyway, this operation of retrieving the assets, if there are any that survived, is called Operation Wolf. And fun fact, Master Chief throughout a few times in this book considers that if peace ever did come to the galaxy, he would consider being diplomatic corps, since he's like pretty good at coming with diplomacy with people. But anyway, on their way down in the Owl, he can't help but think of Cortana too, like a lot. Like Master Chief, I mean, honestly, if you read the book, you'll see that he is honestly so broken up about what happened and feels responsible for the police state that is in the galaxy now. You know, if they just eliminated Cortana, put her down essentially when she started going rampant, as all AIs are supposed to, this would have never happened. And it's kind of framed like that throughout the book, that Cortana isn't affected by the logic plague or any of that stuff, at least not yet. We hear about that in Halo lore, but rather it's just her going rampant, and that's why she's acting so, cuckoo. At least that's what Blue Team thinks. Anyway, on their way down, they're pursued by Banished Seraphs, and a lot of the chapters about this, I won't bore you talking about it, but eventually they're having to trick them into thinking that the ship, the Owl, is a falling meteor, and they do some crazy maneuver to avoid being seen, but at the risk of almost dying. So now we are on chapter 2. So Blue Team, they crashed safely with Special Team. Everyone's fine. They took out the excavation equipment and got ready for the Seraphs now investigating the crash. And really all they did was delay the pursuit and buy them some time to essentially escape. And it's nighttime, by the way. The clouds are gray, and honestly, the book goes into so much detail throughout this whole story about how badly screwed the planet is, like the condition of the planet, large reflective glass lands that are dead like a desert, large swirling clouds of doom and destruction. I mean, it's really crazy. But there are some mentions here throughout the book that life is still kind of here, just in very small portions, like small little tree saplings, essentially grass, you could say, which is why I'm convinced that Reach is in that cinematic that we saw with the Xbox Series X, because it looks like a very dead planet with the minimum amount of life kind of growing through everything. But essentially, Blue Team and Special Crew, they grab the excavation equipment and they get out of there. Meanwhile, Seraphs are shooting overhead, and they shot back a bit. Linda's rifle, by the way, here is capable of firing faster than sound sniper rifle shot that can penetrate and damage and destroy attacking Seraphs, which I thought was pretty cool. But essentially, they leave the site and blow up the Owl to kind of cover their tracks and to throw the Banished off. So now it's been about an hour, and the Banished have arrived at the destroyed crash site of the Owl that Blue Team and the others had arrived on, but are now long gone. All right, so this is chapter 3. So the Banished are here investigating what the heck has happened, and they come to the conclusion that the humans have digging equipment. And why, right? They're wondering why are they here, because effectively the Banished are also looking for something in the ground. And Castor is a new brute character, and honestly, I'm thinking we might actually see him in Halo Infinite. And honestly, if anyone is to rebel against the Banished and become like kind of an arbiter, it might be him. So we might see kind of like an arbiter kind of arc of redemption with Castor. But anyway, he's in charge of the Keepers of one freedom. So he still believes in the journey, right? He still believes in the great journey. He's basically Covenant 2.0, and he's personally invested in finding what is called the portal under the mountain. All right. So this is essentially something that would allow him and his followers, as well as the Banished army, to teleport to the Ark and essentially meet the Banished and help Atriox find something, get something that he's deeply invested in finding. And this is probably Zeta Halo. But we also, in this chapter, we meet Gato Guy, all right, a reserved but very likable elite, in my opinion, best known for wearing no armor and just an energy sword at his belt. So he kind of stands out in that way. But throughout this story, Gato Guy is sort of like Castor's advisor, although not his subordinate. It's kind of weird, but it's confirmed that he is an ex-Silent Shadow warrior, whom, if you don't know, the Silent Shadow were basically the Covenant's most elite warriors, hunting down Spartans or setting trap for Spartans, and even hunting down traitors like Atriox. And these guys may have even been responsible for hunting down Noble Team, which I talk about in another video, and it's too much to get in here. But in this chapter, we also have a sense of the Banished and how they are different from the Covenant. The Banished are much less organized, and in this story, they're just a lot less trustful than each other than in Halo Wars 2. Anywho, there's like 3 factions here on Reach, and they've all been divided 3 parts of Planet Reach to search for something called the Portal Under the Mountain. And the portal is a ancient gateway built by the Foreigners that will allow the Banished to, again, reunite on the Ark and help Atriox retrieve the prize he's been searching for, which is likely Zeta Halo, right? Just about 7 months prior, actually, he had lost Installation 09, a replacement ring to the Spirit of Fire, as we saw in Halo Wars 2. And it's likely that this portal will set up the invasion onto Zeta Halo as seen in Halo Infinite. Also, we learned that Atriox is often missing from the Banished and is just busy doing other things, and uses Ashuram as kind of like a spokesperson, as like a subordinate to talk down to, and then he spreads the words down to all the other Banished leaders. Which, by the way, Ashuram is confirmed Atriox's mentor. And this is so interesting to me because a lot of people thought that, including myself, Ashuram is just some random brute character in Halo Infinite and is kind of propped up as the main bad guy throughout the story, which is pretty much confirmed. He's the big bad boss, right, in Halo Infinite, but he's effectively the person that trained Atriox. So if anyone's going to be super lethal, it's going to be Ashuram, and I kind of buy how he defeated the entire UNSC army in Halo Infinite, but that's probably better saved for another video. Anyway, we also learned that Castor, which is kind of the main character in this story as far as the Banished goes, is Atriox's childhood friend and war brother, which is pretty shocking as to what happens later in the story. But we also learned through Ashuram, which does appear and talk in this book, that Atriox has found remnants of the slip space crystal the prophets hunted for but lost, and is actually called the Holy Light. This Holy Light was actually capable of basically manipulating slip space and allowing passage to places in the galaxy far too distant to travel with their current technology. So Tartarus, as seen in Halo 2, had found these 3 shards, and now they've been claimed by the Banished. They have them. But if that's true, then that means High Charity survived, and so would the Flood. And this was a terrifying thought for Castor. And honestly, I think was just a little drop, a little tease as to what is to come in Halo Infinite, that the Flood are going to pose a massive threat not only to humanity, but also the Banished, as they were in Halo Wars 2, the DLC. Anyway, it was only 3 months earlier, by the way, before this story kicks off, that Atriox and the forces on the Ark had gone silent. And that was right when the Flood broke out on High Charity. And side note, we learned that treating Ungoy with a little respect bought unwavering loyalty. Anyways, this is just a massive info drop and is probably overwhelming, but we still got a lot more, so hang on tight. As far as the current timeline goes, though, Castor is investigating the abandoned owl, and they found evidence of excavation equipment, and this got the Banished panicking that the humans were after the portal too. In reality, they weren't. They were after basically something in the exact same place in Castle Base. But yeah, this panicked the Banished, panicked the Keepers, because they were like, oh crap, the Spartans are going to the portal to destroy it or take it over or something. We have to get there first. So Gatagai actually made a great point during the investigation, and he said that when the fighting takes place, the apparition will appear. Now, what is the apparition? That is what the Banished call Cortana, all right, the apparition. I'm not so sure it's because they don't know her name or want to say her name, but we do learn in this book that saying the name Cortana is forbidden by the UNSC and the Spartans, because just saying her name in the network could actually attract her and bring about a guardian, which means the end of anyone nearby, alright? And that's probably because, as we saw in Bad Blood, guardians bring a flock of death and destruction after them, alright? Which, by the way, I just laughed so hard at this end part, alright? The Banished are terrified of the Guardians, or at least the Keepers are. But apparently, if even one Guardian arrived, the Banished would have to, hightail it out of there. They would have to leave immediately, because the Guardians, the Banished are no match for them. Now we are at Chapter 4. We're back with Blue Team in a canyon. So, Chief, looking upon what used to be farms and the beautiful world of Reach, is just glass and dirt. And Chief, he felt the anger inside him building, man. This was his home. And he thought of doing some really terrible, ugly acts to the aliens, worthy of the demon titles. So probably some graphic stuff, but it's not described. But in the distance, there are Banished armored vehicles firing at each other. Although I think this is kind of left explained and kind of teased throughout the story. Essentially, the Banished are not trusting of each other and are kind of acting a little bit aloof because they don't have proper leadership. But Chief says a big battle on Reach would have attracted Cortana's attention for sure. And Kelly gets annoyed, and John apologizes because saying the name Cortana itself was a danger, right? Because she had listening devices everywhere. Because basically all the AI that joined Cortana at the end of Halo 5 took pretty much control and monitored all the communication network that they can or could across the galaxy. So saying the name Cortana was essentially a risk, all right? Because in the wrong place, right time, that would catch your attention. But here in this chapter, we have some foreshadowing of a big battle coming up, because that could also catch Cortana's attention if something big happened. But we learn in this chapter that the UNSC Infinity is now the primary base of resistance to Cortana and her forces. Not a big surprise. Kelly actually compared Cortana to the devil, and this made Master Chief cringe. He hated the comparison to thinking that Cortana was evil rather than broken. But honestly, it was kind of evil what she was doing, in my opinion, because if you look at what happened, Cortana killed thousands of people by waking the Guardians, and once those EMPs shot across Earth, as we saw at the end of Halo 5, and as I've been talking about for a long time, and it's funny that this has been confirmed, and I didn't think it would ever be, but all those ships, airliners, or whatever you want to call it, futuristic airliners, ships flying around the atmosphere, anything flying was deactivated. So think about all the ships and all those colonies and on Earth that just started free-falling. Military ships crashing into probably schools and hospitals potentially, all this kind of devastation happened, and Cortana didn't really have any remorse about it from what we know, all right? So a lot of people died from just those EMPs. Anyway, in the timeline, Blue Team and Special Crew were moving along Reach's environment in a canyon and realized that there were Seraphs behind them doing fake strafing runs. Effectively, what the Banished were doing here is that they were surveilling Blue Team. Castor, that brute that we were introduced recently, had realized that the humans were here to find the portal under the mountain. They weren't, and that the humans would probably use it or destroy it, and they couldn't let that happen. But they also had absolutely no idea in Reach's 50,000, 100,000 mountains on the planet. They had no idea where the portal was and nowhere really to start. So yeah, their best bet was actually stalking the Spartans and not killing them, all right? Ironically, the humans and Blue Team believed that the Banished were stalking them or surveilling them were actually after Dr. Halsey's assets, and Special Crew suggested Halsey had betrayed them, telling the Banished that they had biometric spoofers that they would need to have and use to basically break into Halsey's base, Halsey's room under Castle Base, right? So John seriously doubted this theory that Halsey would, sell the Infinity out, sell humanity out to the Banished, but that theory couldn't be thrown out completely since Halsey had done this before, as we saw with the Storm faction and everything in Halo 4 Spartan Ops. Now to Chapter 5, and here I got really excited because there's a mention of Noble Team, all right? So again, Blue Team's mission was to open Dr. Halsey's secret vault under Castle Base, which was at this point 1,000 kilometers away. And we also learned that Blue Team has no idea what's inside the vault or the 4 packages that they were sent to retrieve. All they knew was that there was one lockbox with an Avar saber imprinted on the lid, which was essentially the same emblem of Sword Base, and there was 3 cryo bins with cryogenic portion in the vault, and they were told not to ask questions. But the main lockbox, right, that one was a huge mystery here. This one had the emblem of Sword Base, and John had heard whispers of an operation that Noble Team had conducted there during the fall of Reach, that John suggested maybe there could be a connection, but it didn't make sense how a lockbox from Sword Base would get to Castle Base during the final days of Reach, and how it would have anything to do with stopping Cortana. Maybe some good points there. Very, very curious to see what's inside the package, right? Anyway, back to the current timeline. All right, so Blue Team was approaching a Banished base, and the plan was to steal a ride, a Phantom. But things went south when they got caught, and the equipment got stuck, and Master Chief basically got shot in the leg. Spoiler, this kind of screws with him for the entire story. Chief's leg is in a lot of pain, you know, despite him being a Spartan 2 and all. You know, cramping up real bad in his leg. Also, Kelly gets shot and bleeds out a bit, but obviously not deadly, and Fred gets super hit hard on the head, and he gets a concussion, and he acts really wonky throughout the story. For the next few chapters, he is just, I feel like, useless. Anyway, retreating from a storm of banshees that spot them and start just raining hell everywhere, Blue Team is forced to jump into a tunnel, and would you know it, randomly, all of Blue Team are held at gunpoint by humans. But we learned that they're pioneers that had built a whole tunnel system right under Reach's surface, under the glass, and that they were trying to ambush the Banished bases, but now the gig is up. Basically, Blue Team ruined the plan, an operation that they had been planning for months. And one guy kept calling Spartans cyborgs, which I found funny, but essentially they all agreed that they're chill. Someone recognized the Spartans and said they're here to help. Yada yada. Now we're on chapter 6, all right? We continue the situation with Blue Team being hunted down by the Banished, but now they're in narrow tunnels. This is a really, really terrifying situation, all right? Because Blue Team is essentially being hunted in very narrow tunnels that only go one way. They don't split off, and they're being pursued by choppers. So obviously, if those choppers caught up with the humans, they would all be mowed down, and the Spartans also would very likely die. So what did they do? They set a sequence of charges behind them to basically discourage the pursuers. Master Chief is actually pretty hesitant by the end of this chapter to tell Pioneer Militia leader Boldseer that they're actually on Reach for a top secret mission, not to help the Pioneers reseed Reach's terrain and protect them and retake the planet, but rather for a top secret mission that they can't talk about. But to end this chapter off, during this pursuit, they actually successfully blow the tunnels up a good enough distance where they lose the Banished pursuers. Now to chapter 7. So not too far away, Castor is present with Jackal, and they need to have a meeting, all right? So this is big stuff, all right? We learn that Castor doesn't like to use a gravity hammer, which is a symbol of strength amongst the brutes and Banished. And there's also Banished clans. There's the Ravaged Tusk, are smugglers and slavers. They're one of the factions on Reach. And the other one is the Legion of Corpse Moon. They're basically raiders. And then there's the third, the Keepers of the One Freedom, which is basically the New Covenant and Believers of the Great Journey. And I guess they're not really a part of the Banished, but they're ally instead, and they usually wear blue and gold armor or clothing, and they might be who we saw actually in the Halo Infinite gameplay. But the Banished go into a dome of glass. And what I found funny about this is that if they were to fight in it, any kind of big movement, any kind of big hit would probably break and shatter the room, and they would all fall into essentially boiling sulfur. So anyway, Jackal, that really cool elite character I love, stands by Castor's side as he usually is. And honestly, I just love this guy so much. Castor reveals that he knows where the portal under the mountain is during the meeting with the other Banished brute leaders, and he reveals that they are likely headed toward the Highland Mountains, although he's not exactly sure where it is, which is kind of funny to me because it's kind of useless information considering that there are tens of thousands of mountains here. But following the Spartans was likely the answer to finding it. Anyway, this whole chapter primarily focuses on a very tense meeting between these leaders trying to find a good way to react to the UNSC, and most of them don't want to help the Keepers. They don't want to look, or really they just want to protect themselves, and they're worried about the Spartans causing, a war. And really a lot of this chapter is Castor struggling to recruit help from the others. The other Banished leaders do not really want to help him or the Keepers, and honestly I feel like Atriox would give them a good spanking if he was here. But honestly, the Banished, they take note of how lethal the Spartans are, and that the Banished refer to the Reach Pioneers as glass breakers, and that they could be a problem here. Although honestly, they're just all worried about themselves and their own bases and stuff. And I can't help but notice that the Banished seem so well put together, or more organized, in Halo Wars 2, but here they're much less organized. Their morale is a little bit lower and more untrusting. And I don't know if this is because there's different factions here or what. Maybe it's just because Atriox isn't present. But the leaders here, it is tense. They are just one insult away from beating each other down and killing each other. Now to Chapter 8. Now, there isn't much to take in from this chapter. It's pretty short, but essentially what happens is that blue team gets patched up by a doctor. Chief's leg is fixed for now, and the team is under glass. They're in an underglass village, as it's called, with glass block buildings and 100 surplus warthogs armed with Gauss cannons, rockets, and machine guns. So really the pioneers or militia are really well equipped, because Reach is just full of tons and tons of weapons and munitions that were left here after Reach's glassing. But Master Chief talks to the doctor, and I found it interesting. He works up the courage to ask a personal question, which he's just not good about. He's a Spartan. And anyway, Fred is acting a little bit loopy. As I said earlier, he's kind of useless a bit. And then blue team, including John, Kelly, and Fred, they eventually meet up with a female driver, or a marathon racer, if you will, that used to race on Reach. And she is now their driver on a warthog. So John, Kelly, and Fred, they take off while Linda is somewhere else with Special Team. So here's Chapter 9, and it's super short, but I still found it interesting enough. So Linda is separated from blue team, but is with Special Crew in a different tunnel under glass, and she thinks about how she hates the Covenant. So this is one of the few things you get, maybe one of the many things you don't get in the video games versus the novels, is that you kind of get inside the Spartans and learn a little bit more about them, and Linda really hates the Covenant. But if she let that hate seep into her heart, it'll probably get her killed. And she said something so cool to me that Spartans can't hate. But just like Chief, she is super pained to see the planet she grew up, so destroyed and ruined. But the Special Team and Linda are traveling under the glass with the excavation machines at this point. By the way, yeah, they have the excavation machines, and they are following the tire tracks to the rest of blue team that they had left behind. Now, on to Chapter 10. In this part, blue team effectively arrives at the militia's headquarters and discusses what to do next. Keep in mind, moving forward here, blue team is not here to help the pioneers, even though all of them would love to. They have to focus on the mission, and the mission is to go to Castle Base and retrieve Halsey's assets. So essentially what happens here is that Master Chief, Kelly, and Fred, they arrive with stilts at a military complex. All right, so Fred sees the doctor and told to stand down for new orders because he is acting so stupid. And we learned that most of them are untrained and have low base security. So the pioneers, the militia, just don't really know what they're doing. There's only a few soldiers here that have seen combat, and they see the large network of tunnels built, that there's and also we hear that there's 5,000 soldiers ready, and that the tunnels were digged under a Banished base for a surprise attack. And Kelly and Master Chief say very bluntly that if you, the militia, attack the Banished with your current trainees and your current soldiers and your current munitions, that they will all be slaughtered, and that their best bet is that they should hide until the Banished find what they're looking for and leave Reach. And the pioneers, they kept arguing, and honestly it was just so annoying, right? The Spartans persisted, kept making really great points that it's foolhardy and that it would end up in them all dying. And Boltsteer and Aridi, which by the way are the leaders of the militia, push the idea of doing this, is that taking over Mohacs as bait to pull in the Banished and then activate a HAVOK nuke, wiping out most, if not all, the Banished. Now, this could provoke the Banished to using their own nukes, and even worse, Cortana would notice this nuke. So now, Blue Team was kind of on the hook. They could not let them use these nukes. If that happened, it would be game over for everyone, including Operation Wolf would be, it would fail. Right? And the militia was even almost interested on how a guardian would be helpful to them, because here are the Banished on their home planet causing destruction and taking over and stuff. And it's not really explained why, but as read in Halo Bad Blood, rebels were slaughtered by the hundreds by Prometheans and just, incinerated by their weapons, alright? Sent alongside a guardian. So my theory is that the fact that this militia is using weapons to fight another faction makes them a part of the problem that Cortana is trying to get rid of. Cortana probably would not care that they were defending themselves, trying to defend their home world from the Banished. She would just see Banished and also militia as both problems and annihilate everyone on the planet probably. So if the militia used any nukes, they would be wiped out. The Banished would be under threat. The Infinity would be under threat, which by the way is hiding in orbit right now. And Cortana would be, there in a second. So Blue Team is forced to strike a deal. Don't use the nuke, but in return, we will help you take over new Mohacs. And don't use the nuke, alright? They don't want that. Also, Master Chief couldn't help but feel Shapov's suggestion that Dr. Halsey is working with the Banished. Couldn't be ruled out, although very unlikely. This keeps being brought up throughout the book, so I thought I would mention it, and I find it as an interesting theory that they are even discussing. In Chapter 11, the plan is going through. Alright, so the Spartans have already advanced upon the tunnel and are sneaking up on the new Mohacs base. And they need to be quiet, alright? They need to be stealth, because the plan is to get into New Mohacs, which is a pretty well-sized Banished base, and cause as much disarray, blow up vehicles, and take out as many towers as possible so that the militia on foot and warthogs can advance and take out the rest. But Blue Team is digging with the LHD machines and hit a pocket of carbon dioxide, and Mokai and the Rangers immediately pass out, and Chief breaks a hole through the surface, and the whole tunnel is just filled with unconscious soldiers, right? Hundreds of them. So this chapter really got me on the edge of my seat, because with all those soldiers unconscious without proper oxygen and too much carbon dioxide, they were all taking brain damage, and the only people that could save them was Master Chief. And they now only had 10 minutes to reach the base before it would notice that a Jackal squad went missing that Master Chief just took out. But eventually they made it, and a lot of them recovered, and Master Chief went into the base and immediately started taking down Banished soldiers stealthily. So chapter 12 is where it picks up and kind of gets fun in my opinion. This is basically the beginning of a massive war that will take place for pretty much the second act of this book. And this chapter is basically where Blue Team infiltrates the base and sneaks around, causing chaos, and takes over. So here they're taking out patrols, sentries in the 64 towers, and meanwhile Fred is needing to plant C-10 on all the aircraft, being about 50 Banshees and 20 Seraphs. And Chief is being a complete savage here. He threw a grenade in a room with Banished without a fuse lit on it, and when they all jumped down for cover, he would put 2 bullets in each of their heads, so completely savagery. But now the Banished had suspected infiltration was happening, and Chief tells Boldseer, the militia leader, to start the vehicle assault outside, and tells him that they're bringing the 2 HAVOK nukes just in case. This is really frustrating because the assault's already underway and they're bringing the nukes anyway, but he's trying to buy time for the Warthog assault and destroy and slow down the Marauders, which were a new vehicle seen in Halo Wars 2 and probably coming to Halo Infinite, as we've seen Mega Block toys of them. But as soon as the Banished vehicles were about to escape the base, the Pioneers blew them up, but ultimately Blue Team was successful. They took New Mohacs, they took the town, and watched the Banished retreat. Chapter 13, this is where the story gets really good in my opinion. This is probably one of my favorite chapters because it got into the thick of it and what's going on with the Infinity. And last time we saw in Halo 5, the Infinity escaped Cortana just in the nick of time. And in Halo Bad Blood, the Infinity is confirmed to be going around the galaxy picking up key UNSC personnel while having to avoid Cortana in a cat and mouse chase. Anyways, on the chapter, Halsey is burdened with the guilt of kidnapping the children who'd become Spartan 2s, and I believe this is going to be a theme in Halo Infinite since it was teased in Halo 5's ending with Halsey being a monster, as Cortana called her, and in Shadows of Reach Epilogue, Halsey is appeared being more regretful about the Spartan program. So interesting stuff. But in the present, she's concerned that the Infinity is not going to make it to Reach in time because they had 20 minutes to get there and unload troops to help defend the base base. Otherwise, the Infinity could not deploy during daylight, so Blue Team would be forced to help Pioneers for another 12 hours, and they still had another 1,000 kilometers to get to the Highland Mountains. And we learned that the Spartan 3s aboard the Infinity and Palmer and Lasky are present. And Dr. Halsey now has a robot prosthetic arm, probably basically like Cat's arm from Noble Team. But Lasky explains the reason that they're delayed is because the Banished destroyers in Reach's moon atmosphere is getting ready to take new Mohacs, and if they encounter them, it may lead to Cortana's attention. And we learned that Halsey, if she had been honest to Thomas Lasky about what exactly Blue Team was sent to retrieve on Reach, that Palmer would arrest her right there on the spot. So whatever it was probably super illegal. Not even Blue Team knew the contents of the 4 packages that they were going to get. And honestly, as Dr. Halsey put it, it was in gross violations of unified interstellar law. So it probably had to do with the fact that the brain stems that were used to make Cortana illegally were also used to create something else, potentially like Chief's new AI, but we'll talk about that soon. But Lasky says that if the Banished used the satellites in Reach's orbit, then that would draw in the Guardian, and that he would leave Blue Team behind if he had to save the Infinity. And he also confirms what I suspected for a long time, and that is that Cortana is intent on destroying the Infinity, not just going in there and arresting everyone with Prometheans, but actually blowing it up. So I found that interesting. But why this conversation was taking place, the Banished started making movement from one of Reach's moons to new Mohacs, and Lasky orders the Longshore satellite sweepers to defend the frigates out in space. If the jamming blanket goes down that they set over Reach, then Cortana would immediately hear tons and thousands of transmissions bouncing off Reach and its moons. Not only that, if the Banished takes the base, then the Pioneers will use their nukes, and that'll definitely alert Cortana. So, long story short, Thomas Lasky had to get involved now with the Infinity. And at this point, the Infinity had moved into the planet's orbit and atmosphere, and he actually ordered Palmer to drop 125 Spartans onto the base. I'll say that again, 125. That is a crazy amount of Spartans. But their support was mission critical for Blue Team. All right, with everything that was ramping up, big war up new Mohacs, they had to do it. But Lasky and Halsey warned that Palmer doesn't want to know what's inside Castle Base, so hyping up more and more about what these assets are. And here at chapter 14, so the battle was underway, and Blue Team was happy that their mission entangled with the Pioneers helping liberate Reach. But outside the base was an army of over 2,000 Banished forming to get ready to lay hell on the base. There was a lot of vehicles here, and Master Chief was essentially setting up traps and blowing them up and kind of tricking them into thinking that it was aerial attacks. But it's around this time that I believe that the cinematic would take place, which is why I'm convinced that the Halo Infinite campaign may open during this battle sometime during this chapter, as it would probably be a good opening for Halo Infinite, and is at least would probably be in a cutscene. I think would be a great starting point as far as this whole book goes. Also, a fun fact, it's confirmed that not only Spartan 4s are on the Infinity, but also 3s. And for what the 4s lacked in brute strength, they also had great resourcefulness. Now to chapter 15. So Fred, Kelly, and Master Chief and one special crew member, Shapov, re-enter the base and basically get briefed on what to do next. And they see about 40 to 50 Pelicans dive down, but actually they were wrong. It was Banished. So tons of Banished ships were flying into the base, getting ready to tear up new Mohacs. At this point, Master Chief has not been able to make contact with the Infinity, and they were supposed to already be there with thousands of UNSC troops and potentially up to 3,000 ODSTs, but they were not there. So he says, y'all gotta get out of here. We're all going to die, and it's pretty much helpless, and we need to break out to the south, a run and gun to safety, because we are going to die without the Infinity's help. Predictably, militia leader Boldseer is like, I'm gonna set the nuke off because we're all gonna die anyway, so yeah, I'm gonna give it 35 minutes, and y'all can get out of here before then. And Master Chief is like, all right, well, the mission's failed anyway. Let's nuke it. All right, fine. Now at chapter 16, this is a big chapter full of action and it gets pretty nuts. So the Banished armor yard at New Mohacs. Blue team could see potentially hundreds of Banshees moving in, however, all outside the firing range of the anti-air MN71 turrets. So Seraphs would be sitting, one at a time, destroy the turret while also blowing up. But now down to their last turret, we learn more about Grievers in this chapter, and they're really tough, heavy aircraft, basically, and I think they're probably going to be vehicles in Halo Infinite. They have a lot of plasma power. So Chief told the militia to hold the aircraft batteries to hold fire. If they gave away the trap, then the bombers would kill every single one of them in the base. So while there were some militia fleeing to the south, there was still people at the base defending it. And at this point, they're pretty much all surrounded. Dropships swooping in, thousands of Banished soldiers moving in. I mean, it's just crap, right? Well, Master Chief had a plan to basically lure in the Grievers, which had the potential of killing them instantly, and that worked. They moved in thinking that they had no more anti-air turrets, and the militia shot them down. The Infinity kept trying to make contact to Chief while this was all happening, although it was just gargling static. And John couldn't really stand by or even talk because he was standing with the initial ground force, and thousands of Banished troops marched with vehicle protection onto the base. Anyway, there's this super awesome sequence where Blue Team is taking down liches, those larger Phantom kind of ships, via rocket launchers while skidding around in a Warthog. Anyway, they spotted the last 3 aircrafts trying to deploy and decided one of them were close enough to use to capture and bring the excavation equipment as well as themselves to Castle Base undetected. Because the plan was, of course, to get to Castle Base, right? That was the mission. So they detected a second massive Banished wave were coming in from the clouds. Blue Team's Hog stopped and rumbled, and they learned that the malicious leader, Bodseer, was injured along with others. So they took the Warthog onto the landing of the Lich and drove into the troop bay, running over brutes, crushing elites, just complete savagery, and they almost had it completely wiped out and under their control. And then the Infinity patched in through Chief and declared 10 seconds to missile impact on all Banished aircraft. Alright, they're probably gonna die here, right? They're on a Banished aircraft. So just as an equal haste getting on, they had to slam the gas in reverse and get the hell off the ship, because just seconds later it blew up. And the Infinity comms declared that 100 Spartan 4s were being inserted along with other heavy insertions. Driving through this big battlefield of just chaos with troops running around and blown up ships and destroyed wraiths and so on, the driver Ditzel was shot, unfortunately, and Blue Team moved her body aside and they drove off, and the battle kind of calmed down here, and they started talking to Palmer, who arrived. And there was a lot of tension in this scene because Palmer was the one that got Fireteam Osiris to hunt down Blue Team just 1 year ago in Halo 5. Anyway, Palmer agreed to take care of the Banished while giving Blue Team a Pelican to complete their mission. Meanwhile, 15,000 UNSC soldiers were deploying and overwhelming, wiping out Banished forces in the entire region. Chapter 17 now. So basically, the UNSC won this fight at New Mohacs. Of course, the battle wasn't over, but Blue Team would get the repairs that they desperately needed. Master Chief's leg would get patched up, delaying any more muscle damage. Kelly's artery vein would be fixed, and Fred would just have to live with his helmet. And Spartan helmets, by the way, were extremely complicated and couldn't really be repaired mid-missions unless super necessary, and it wasn't super necessary because really Fred's problem was a concussion. But John thought it was strange that the Keepers of the One Freedom shot down the Owl when it was first inserted on Reach and chased them down, but now in the fight nowhere to be seen. And this was actually set up by Castor, who had kind of intended to do this when the other leaders were being difficult, as we read a few chapters ago. But Palmer and the Infinity Intelligence didn't have an answer for this one. And yeah, anyway, as Blue Team is stripping down the equipment on the Pelican, they see a Banished stealth corvette heading towards the Highland Mountains. It had come from a Banished supercarrier, and Palmer explained the Banished were too nervous on alerting Cortana. So mid-chapter, we actually switch to Castor's point of view and the Banished point of view. Castor is at a cloaked base overlooking New Mohacs and the UNSC victory, and speaks with Gata Guy, that cryptid elite that I love so much. But once again, we see humans being around these aliens, and they're keepers. These are humans in keeper colors, blue and gold, that have pledged their allegiance to the Great Journey, and this is actually going to play into something much bigger later. But they even wield human sidearms, which I found interesting. But Castor, a believer in the Great Journey, believed that these 4 humans with them were a gift from something that he's been calling the Oracle, a female-based foreigner in Celia that both the UNSC and Banished underestimated in power. However, this Oracle, whatever it was, probably a foreigner monitor, right, was supposedly captured, and Castor had somehow spoke to the Oracle many times since this capture. It's not really explained here what's going on, but I found it very intriguing. Ashuram's corvette would land nearby, and we actually get a confirmation that the shock rifles here are indeed Banished. And Ashuram walks out wielding something called a gravity axe, which isn't a gravity hammer, so it's probably a new weapon I found really interesting. But Gadogai warned Castor to open his hands to reveal no weapon, as the war chieftain Ashuram has no petty games of intimidation, as Bruce usually demonstrated in the Banished. But Castor tells Ashuram that they have 2,000 keepers and 300 craft searching the mountain, and Gadogai actually defends Castor by saying that they did find thousands of elderly humans and youth hiding in tunnels, which was the militia's family, essentially, the ones that weren't in the front lines like at New Mohacs. However, the Banished, or the keepers here, actually did not bother them except for taking a few to basically help with finding a portal, but they weren't really helpful. But they did suggest the plan to take the helpless humans hostage to get the Infinity and the militia to back off. And right in the middle of this conversation, they see 20 UNSC aircraft heading to the Highland Mountains, and based on their path, Castor orders to shoot them all down. Even though this is what Castor has been waiting for, to find exactly where the humans are, he pretty much assumes exactly where they're going, which is not a mountain at all, but the missing mountain, aka Minichite Mountain, which was a very uniquely shaped mountain right by Castle Base, or rather right above Castle Base. But when the Covenant first invaded Reach, the plasma bombardment effectively destroyed this entire mountain, and so it was more like a lump now. But this was all kind of flowing really well as far as reading this, because the portal under the mountain was right by Castle Base, so they were all going in the exact same place here. So what Castor actually saw was Blue Team being escorted by about 20 aircraft into the Highland Mountains heading towards Castle Bay. So essentially what was happening here is they were crossing a massive Aransas Bay, as it's called, heading towards the missing mountain, right, with special crew and all their excavation gear. So the description of Highland Mountains is actually haunting here. You know, once lush forests and meadows were now charred and blackened dirt, landslides that size of cities crashed into the meadows below, and as we read later, even into the shaft down into Castle Base. But everything here is just completely destroyed, and John recounts what happened in Halo First Strike, where right after Halo 1, but before Halo 2, he went back to Reach to retrieve Halsey and others from the fall of Reach that they weren't able to escape the planet, and they actually took a slip space altering crystal that must be the holy light, right? And it was eventually destroyed, but the Banished, or at least Atriox, claims they have it now. But anyway, on their way to Castle Base, over 90 and growing Banshees and Seraphs began to head towards Chief and the escort of over 20 UNSC dropships. Master Chief realized that this was a denial operation, and perhaps the Banished don't know about their mission, because if they blow up Blue Team, they won't get the biospoofers required to enter Castle Base, which they've been thinking for a while that the Banished want, but now they're not so sure. Anyway, in the pursuit, the pilot took a nosedive into the canyon by the ground, and basically we enter in quite a long sequence of basically this Pelican, which is now by itself without backup by the broadswords and other crafts, is being hunted and chased through this epic kind of almost Star Wars speeder chase through this canyon down in the cracks of Highland Mountains. It actually almost reminds me of the package delivery in Halo Reach and the Pelican driven by Carter, and Chief would have to shoot out, basically through this, the cargo hold. And actually, while flying through this place, it pained Master Chief to know that the place where it all started, where Chief and Cortana met for the first time 7 years ago, would also this whole place would play a part in ending her. But anyway, eventually the Pelican was shot and they had to make a quick crash and evacuation, and considering they had no backup now and most of their backup that were still around had no ammo, about 3 Banshees were still pursuing them. But once upon crashing, they had some time to basically empty the Pelican, say their goodbyes to Shapov, who at this point had a severe injury in the chest and was coughing up blood. And so Blue Team and the other special team members ran away, and Shapov had a rocket launcher and shot down all 3 Banshees pursuing them. So no longer did they have any aircraft pursuing them, but now they had to get to Castle Base's entrance. But Shapov did end up dying in the Pelican explosion soon after they left. But anyway, Chapter 19. Blue Team found themselves hiding on the shoulder of Vandalite Mountain, observing above Castle Base. What they were doing here was waiting for the Keepers to do the hard work of mining through the facility. And then at that point, the plan would be to take the shaft, defend 2 kilometers down, and then right there, it would be where they've been going this whole time. It's Dr. Halsey's assets is right in front of them. And there was only 10k Yar and Ongoy at the entrance, but on the side of the valley basin, there was 3,000 Keepers and Marauders, Wraiths, and Ghosts in the Flatlands area. There was also a heavy intrusion corvette at the end of the glass flats not too far off. So Blue Team would have to take control of this entire region and wipe out all these forces, but not by themselves, because not much longer the UNSC broadswords approached, stirring up Banished forces, and again, here we are with a massive battle. And just 200 meters behind Blue Team, Mokai and Van Hout were actually hiding with the excavation machines. So Blue Team would tag the Wraiths with these infrared beams, which I thought were pretty cool and would be a pretty neat weapon, and it kind of reminded me of the orbital drop bomb things that you could tag vehicles or players that are in Halo Reach's campaign and actually now the multiplayer on PC. But UNSC forces started dropping in, and Blue Team would have to cross this huge valley to the geyser, which, by the way, the geyser was effectively the Banished drilling equipment down in the tunnel that was sticking through the tunnel that was spitting up all the dirt that they were digging through. But while they were running through the valley, 100 Grey Guard brutes jumped out of the Corvette with heavy guns and even a new, larger fuel rod type gun, probably the Ravager, although it's kind of described as something different than the Ravager from what we saw in Infinite's gameplay earlier this year. But John requests ground support and reordered Air to not touch the geyser because he wanted the Keepers to keep doing the hard work to keep digging through the tunnel to Castle Base. So yeah, he also wanted their equipment intact and also the pirate lift that we will talk about later. Blue Team would start opening fire on the 100 Grey Guard brutes that were making their way towards the shaft, and their numbers were quickly reduced from 100 to 50 to 30 to just a handful, up to only 13 brutes were left. Although they did actually make it into the shaft, they jumped in and disappeared in the darkness. Now on to Chapter 20. Guys, we're getting close to the ending of the book here, so just a little bit longer. But if you are afraid of heights, this might be your worst nightmare, right? So Blue Team and Special Team need to capture the pirate lift that is effectively a gravity beam lift at the very bottom of a 2,500 meter drop, all right? And keep in mind, this cave is completely pitch dark, all right? So this is crazy. So they are working down the line pretty quickly. They actually were near Castle Base's entrance with no Keepers nearby, but they needed the pirate lift, which was at the very bottom of the shaft, the 2,800 meter shaft, and they needed to take control of that and have it operational to bring the excavation equipment that was left at the top of the hole to, brought down about 1,000 meters down to Castle Base's entrance. We also learned a cool fact is that Spartan 2s can actually drop the distance of about 90 stories high and live, although it would disable them for a few seconds and break their shields. And there's a reason why they brought that up in the book. Suddenly, by Castle Base's entrance, Keepers appear, all right? And they start firing at Chief, and they shoot his cable. And he starts going into an almost free fall with, I think, pretty much 88, 89 degree incline down the wall. So John is forced to run down and then jump into the pirate lift gravity field and descend quite slowly compared to free falling. But his leg was now in critical condition, and what he had to do is he had to grapple shot onto the rock wall and start shooting at this pesky keeper brute guy that kept, shooting at him and stuff. And eventually Master Chief would end up back into this grav lift. He would fall down almost in cartwheels and end up there. But effectively, a blue team zipped down, and their cables were actually too short, so they couldn't get as close as a Chief could. But basically, there was just a big shootout with Spartans on cables and Master Chief in a lift versus ground forces on the very bottom of the shaft on the pirate lift, as they called it. Pretty cool here. The brutes actually threw man-sized boulders up as cover to go up the lift and start heading towards Chief, and Chief was forced to fall 100 meters, and man, did the impact seem like it hurt. And John was actually unable to move, and a Jackal ran up to him, started threatening him, and even threatening to blow his leg off with a carbine rifle, but Chief recovered in time and completely pwned the Jackal. So, predictable. And now we are on the final chapter of Shadows of Reach, alright, chapter 21. This is what we've been waiting for. So, blue team is well in Castle Base, alright? They've been digging through with the excavation equipment. However, Fred is on the very bottom level patrolling them because there's keepers that had escaped on the very bottom level that probably were what they were doing originally was looking for the portal under the mountain. So there's probably a lot of keepers down there, but they weren't bothering Fred or blue team. But they came across the last room, and blue team was effectively in Dr. Halsey's lab, and they noticed a pair of floating green eyes that just appeared, which is probably an AI left here. But just watching blue team, I thought this was so weird and creepy, and it felt so Halo that there's just like these weird kind of abominations kind of sitting around Dr. Halsey's lab, kind of still alive, these weird AI. But they found the cabinet that they needed, but John and Linda would actually have to lift up a bunch of debris with their legs for it to be accessed by Kelly. And this is where it gets really good, right? So the hologram warning sign that had been on the cabinet originally vanished. And once Kelly put on biospoofers, which were effectively Dr. Halsey's hands printed in 3D, and also they had to be the same size and stuff, Kelly pushed against the cabinet, and suddenly a middle-aged woman, AI, appeared resembling a sisterly resemblance to Cortana. Her hair was braided and wrapped around in a circlet, and her eyes haunted John the most, alright? No pupils, no eyelashes, just a pair of effectively black holes, as he described it. She spoke, "You are not Dr. Halsey." And Kelly said, "And you're not Kalima. You can't be." Kalima was actually a prototype AI, a smart AI that Halsey had made right before Cortana, and in many ways was Cortana's older sister, so to speak. And she couldn't recognize Kelly even though they had met right before the fall of Reach and the fail-safe destruction of Castle Base that was meant to destroy Kalima, right? White Glove that was meant to destroy all these AIs and precious data. Right? Now, all these assets were protected for if the Banished came here and tried to get into the assets, it would all, blow up again, as there was a lot of charges set for, any intruders trying to get into this stuff. But I have to wonder why the UNSC didn't come to this place earlier. Maybe they didn't need to. Maybe, I don't know. There's just been a lot of time that they didn't come back here. But anyway, the AI kept repeating to Kelly, "You are not Dr. Halsey." And Kelly replied, "But I have her handprints. She wants you to give me access. That's why she gave me them." And this AI seemed really confused about its own existence, and how the hell do you give someone's fingerprints to someone else? But John realized why he was lifting up this massive thing of debris, and his legs are about to break. He said, "Is a subroutine, not a real smart AI." So Kelly had to pass it with a phrase, "Whatever it takes," is what she said, and it worked. The AI got much more cheerful and happy and looked much less creepy and recognized Kelly as Halsey. And Kelly snuck into the open vault and grabbed the 4 packages, the ones that they came for, that looked almost prosaic, like a stack of Harbin and cotton candy package. And it was almost hard to believe that so many people died for what kind of looked like a high-end shopper spree, that Kelly just went to the shopping mall and grabbed some cool stuff from some stores at a mall. And anyway, the 3 quickly scrambled as the whole base started to rumble, and they got out of there. Meanwhile, in the same chapter, as I said earlier, Fred was on the very bottom level of the shaft, in enemy territory, right? And he had quite a shocking experience, and I really have no idea what to make of this, or at least at first. Fred heard a familiar voice speak to him. It was Veta Lopez. All right, she was an Oni agent who had to believe to have died 2 years ago. All right, she had been given the nickname of Mom, and this is really interesting because of the 4 humans that were by Castor when they were overlooking the whole new Mohacs defeat. Is that these 4 humans were there? All right, and that same person, one of the same ones, the leader, was nicknamed Mom, as previously described in the book. But here she was in the flesh again. And in a nutshell, this means an Oni agent, actually 4 Oni agents, Lepus as well as the ferrets, basically defected and joined the Keepers, maybe? Anyway, she spoke to the Spartan 2 and gave him a present, a message and a capsule. She then sprayed her M7 machine gun above his head and yelled, "Go, demon, be gone." And he was certain that it wasn't a hallucination because the capsule that was in his hand was real. And one last time, we take a perspective of the Banished. All right, Castor, Gatagai, and the Keepers are inside the Foreigner's sacred transport installation. Castor was eager to have the portal open, which he didn't want to show because it just made him look basically like a weakling, and which, by the way, was happening. All right, so the Banished did accomplish their goal too. They are opening the portal to the Ark. A massive vortex of clouds in the atmosphere started to shift around Castle Base, and lightning started to become super frequent. Honestly, I wish there was some concept art or something I could show you guys because this sounds so cool. But at this point, Gatagai, who had been annoying Castor a lot, finally opened his palm as a sign of friendship. A rare occurrence, even in the Covenant days, that Gatagai was inviting friendship of Castor as they've been together on this whole journey. And Atriox's Lich arrived, and Castor was determined to let his 4 faithful humans on board, which most likely included Mom, or aka Lepus Fotis, which most definitely included Veta Lopez, as she was with Castor in the last scene with the Banished. But in this scene, Castor meets Atriox and pisses him off, long story short, on trying to bring the humans on board onto his Lich, and tries to tell the Silent Shadow Gatagai, which is his new friend basically, to kill him, Castor, and bring him his head. Despite Castor being Atriox's childhood friend and, lifelong friends in the Banished, essentially, is just telling him to get, cut his head off. All this really ended up doing was pushing Gatagai, this ex-Silent Shadow guy, to join the Keepers of the One Freedom, despite thinking the Great Journey is all BS. So now we have one final chapter. It's called the Epilogue, and it's effectively what happens after. So it's a pretty short chapter, but there's a fair amount of juicy stuff in it. The Infinity now has to get the hell off Reach, as certainly a Guardian is already on the way, right? Because the Banished successfully fired the portal over the Highland Mountains, and Cortana was most certainly aware of this now and sent a Guardian to investigate what is going on. But Blue Team, they arrive on the Infinity and meet with Captain Veronica Dare of Oni, Buck's girlfriend, or actually now wife, greeted Blue Team. So here is where Veronica Dare would learn of Mom's survival, which was the nickname of Veta Lopez, right? And we don't really see what is in the capsule, but Fred explains that effectively summarizes the message in the text here, that Atriox's return is expected, that the Ferrets and Lopez are working for the Keepers, and that the Keepers are on the Ark to initiate the Great Journey, aka fire all the Halo Rings. So the book kind of ends on this note, where the Infinity is having to leave, and they don't have time for everyone on the surface, all the Pelicans and soldiers, to get back to the Infinity, so they have to be left behind until this war is over. Which I kind of like, is because that's been kind of like the emotional tone throughout the book, and how John wants to see Reach, repaired and protected, and a good amount of soldiers, a handful, even just a few, would be good enough to help lead the Pioneer. But Dr. Halsey walks up to John and takes that package, especially the one that's pointed out is the sword base one, and that one has the Avar symbol on it, and which is, by the way, what this whole book has been about. And Halsey took the package from John and said, "This won't be easy, but it's the only option we have left." So there it was. Halo Shadows of Reach has been anticipated for several months now, and is the first step into Halo Infinite's story. and I have a lot to say about it, and we still have a lot to talk about. But if you want to check out the book in full yourself, then be sure to check out that link down in the description. Get the book for 30 days for free on Audible, or go ahead and buy it on Amazon if you want a printed version. But this book, I have a few words about it, all right? So after reading it, I couldn't help but feel amused by all the small details, you know, about the Ongoy and the humor in it, and the jokes are really well played, although very rare. It made me chuckle when they were there, and I couldn't help but feel cheated. Look, most of this book was fun, right? With the first 8 chapters were a little bit of a drag, honestly, and I kind of kept zoning out. But the rest was really fun and entertaining and got me thinking about what was going to happen in Infinite. And the author did say, don't read too much into it, but I'm almost at the point where I don't know what I would read too much into anyway. Because, I mean, I really like the Banished Brute Castor and the Gatagai Elite. I hope they make some part in Halo Infinite. And I really enjoyed the chapter with Halsey. That's just, it felt really right to me. Everything did, honestly, with the characters. I mean, this is Halo Gold here. But my problem with it is that right at the very end, what this entire book has been teasing about, all right, was what was inside those packages. And I found myself kind of reading desperately to get to that part, to get to the big reveal, but there was really none. And this book is more about the journey rather than the destination, I feel like, at the end. And I kind of felt like it wasn't set up that way, or at least the advertising wasn't. And I'm not really sure why Halo books have the tendency to tease something for an extremely unsatisfying ending. You know, because there was times in the book where Thomas Lasky was telling Palmer, you don't want to know what's in the package. You don't want to know it. All right, it's a lot of trouble. And then Halsey's teasing it, talking about, oh, you know, if Palmer only knew, I would be in big trouble. She would spank me and I'd be in so much trouble and she'd arrest me and stuff. And I'm like, what's in the freaking package? What's in there? You know, is it like the full AI of Kalima? I don't know how that works. I'm not that good on Halo lore, but it makes me wonder, like, is there another AI in there? Is it a Cortana model? Is it something, you know, involving Halsey's brain? Right? Because she made a lot of clones of her brains. I don't know. Is it some super weapon? You know, all these things, I feel like it didn't even answer, like, the question that it was setting up, you know? And I understand in a way, because they want the juicy info to be in Halo Infinite, not in a novel that most people aren't going to buy because most people just don't read Halo novels. And that's fine. But, like, not even giving us a hint about what was in the package, you know? Like, I felt cheated, you know? I felt cheated that there's not even really anything there might be that I missed. Right now, I just don't see it because maybe I read through it too fast, and I don't know, or someone else in the community might even just see something I didn't see. But I don't know. I was like, there's not even anything to theorize about what's in the package than any more information than we had before the book came out, which I found as a massive disappointment. Yeah, it was a journey, an adventure, and I thought it was pretty cool overall. And I learned a lot about, you know, post Halo 5. This is stuff that we're only supposed to know that was originally planned to come out just a month or two before Halo Infinite. We're way ahead of our time, and I suppose I should be grateful. Guys, I think this book is worth a read, or at least a listen to. You can check it out, again, on Audible for free, 30 days. And I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. This is probably one of my biggest videos I've ever done, about 8,000 word script and notes. Although a lot of it, I just kind of went off the just started talking, off the cuff. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like this video up. Let's try to get up if you're still watching, try to get it up to 4,000 to 5,000 likes. That would be insane. And also subscribe. Join me on the Halo journey of following Halo for over 9 years, and expect more videos like this, all right? Because I had a whole lot of fun. It's been hard making this video, but a lot of crazy content to jump into, and this is not the end. All right, we're going to be talking more about this book. There's a lot of theories, a lot of things that I already want to talk about that I didn't really quite be able to fully go into or even mention in this video. But I will catch you guys in the next one soon. All right, you take care. Peace.